Hello, listeners. This is the Risky Planner Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm looking at this house and I'm talking to my grandpa. I'm like, yeah, I looked at this house in Toronto. My wife and I are thinking about buying it. It has a little bit of asbestos in it. He's like, asbestos? I got a roll of it sitting right here. I'm like, no, you didn't, Grandpa. Anyways, nice to see you,
sure
Albert.
he didn't? Maybe he did.
Maybe he
you
did.
don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, have you made sure that he's okay?
I mean, he almost lived to 100, so at least he didn't touch the asbestos, because you get in trouble when you touch it.
I mean, you don't get in trouble when you touch it. You get in trouble when it enters your lungs
Albert,
and you get fibrosis.
Personal health is a priority and very important.
I don't disagree, obviously, and thank you for putting me into one of those very fun rhetorical traps where, I'm not allowed to disagree because if I do, I'm the bad guy. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, there's buildings full of asbestos everywhere in the world that aren't causing people to die spontaneously. The problem is that when you drill a hole in them to put your fancy new 21st century security camera in, you've officially exposed all the people who work there. I can tell
you
you're
have a
this
problem. Yeah, you have a problem.
Yeah, it's not a problem unless it is, right? It's one of those things.
You know what? I mean, speaking of problems, I think we're going out west in this episode. And
we are.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about a problem.
Starting on a confrontational note here.
Yes, No, I think it's exciting, actually. Like we're talking about, in a previous episode, we talked about government support, vision, financial support. Like, it's all really, really exciting. And for our listeners, we're going to be talking about, Alberta, and we're staying in Canada. But also, like, you and I were talking before getting ready for this episode, and yeah, we're both Americans, right? Born and raised.
Yep.
And you and I both subscribe, among other things, to the New York Times.
To the paper of record, the Gray Lady, the New York Times.
The New York Times. And this story that we're going to talk about was actually, every week there's a letter from the New York Times that comes into your email. It's the Canada letter, right?
Yeah.
Comes into your email. And it's pretty interesting to see the New York Times take on
it is
Canadian.
Like, I think it's my favorite of the Times newsletters. Like, I get 2 or 3 of them, and that's probably the one that I read most carefully, honestly.
Yeah. And you can either vouch for it or debunk it. It's pretty interesting. And
it's good stuff, yeah. And it's the Times, so it's well researched and tries to present a fairly balanced view, which, if you're a certain kind of person, means that it presents a liberal view. But to me, it reads as a factual take on what's going on. And this week it did talk about Alberta,
exactly
directly.
Yeah.
And like a little bit of confluence of circumstances. Like, I've also had a couple of posts on LinkedIn do some pretty decent engagement lately on this very topic.
You're becoming a bit of an influencer in the project control space. Is that?
I am not. Literally, some
shout
people
out to
read what I
Diego.
write.
Like, you two are neck and neck for influencer status.
Are we? Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers and it looks fantastic. So,
well, I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that I've met your high standard, and I now know that I have someone to knife in my good friend Diego. I got to figure out how to tank his.
Shout out
I'm going to
Diego.
get into all of his. I'm going to use I'm going to use one of my subs. My other accounts to go like sub him all the time.
Copy all of his content and just read.
I was just gonna go put racist stuff in his comments and see how that does for him.
Yeah, he's Brazilian. I don't know. Is that?
Diego.
I don't know if that would work or not.
Do that
but right. Let's go back to the story, because it was interesting. I mean, it was in the Canada letter. Checked out. It's all about Alberta. I mean, there's a lot of, like you said, a confluence of sort of a confluence of storylines, right? Like, there's the Alberta separatist movement.
Yeah.
There is Alberta government putting money towards projects. It's all pretty exciting. There's the major projects office. That's, the federal government in Canada are supporting projects. So there's a lot of action happening in Alberta, and you were based in Alberta, so you have the inside track, right?
And I have been loudly complaining for months about how Alberta seems to be basically excluded from the major projects office, right? Like the Carney kind of nation building projects initiative that really was heavily focused on not Alberta, right?
Yeah.
The only thing that got name dropped within the MPO's kind of mandate when they first released it, it wasn't even in one of the like, this is a pipeline project. It was just one of the other kind of things. It was like a side hustle basically for the MPO, was the carbon capture and storage, the Pathways project, right?
Right. Yep.
So that Pathways project, carbon capture and storage is a bit of a boondoggle, right? So it was almost it's not there's no example of a successful carbon capture and storage project, like literally none. And I'm talking about success the way we usually measure project success, which is, the three-legged stool. Did it do what it said it was going to do? Did you do it on time, and did you do it on budget? 0 carbon capture projects have hit all 3 of those targets. Literally none.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Except maybe at pilot scales, and even then, I don't know enough about those to say one way or the other, but I would bet that they didn't either.
Yep.
Okay. So the Pathways project is a big one, right? Which means, to me, reading the data, it's most likely going to be a big failure, right?
Yeah.
So like, there's the separatism movement is ridiculous on its face for an enormous number of reasons. It's also something that Danielle Smith has used as like a political springboard, like a lot of her base are the, the Alberta folks who really wish that Alberta were Quebec, not that it spoke French, but that it just had this kind of special independent status and got to do kind of whatever it wanted to, in certain ways. Not to say that Quebec gets to do whatever it wants to. I recognize that there's a legal framework there, but like some of the Alberta separatist types literally want it to be its own country, right?
Yeah.
Not like recognized as independent within Canada, but a whole separate country,
Albert, it's like, just to provide a little bit of context, like the sort of mindset behind Albertans wanting to be their own separate country, like maybe give a little bit of context to like what is that for our listeners? Like, just, there's going to be a lot of listeners that are outside of the US. So like, we're going to talk about Alberta. I'd like a little bit of kind of the inside, like the mindset why.
Just a little bit of context for 2 reasons. One, like I said, it's kind of ridiculous on its face. I don't want to dignify it with a whole lot of serious discussion. So that's one reason. The other reason is that, we're here to talk about the pipeline project. And I want to get to that at some point, but just to do a little bit of table setting, let's talk about what is the deal with Alberta separatists.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and why is it connected to this whole broader conversation?
I'm timing you, by the way. I'm timing you. This is a test.
Okay. All right. How long do I have?
Yeah. You have 13 seconds.
13. Okay. Well, I'm going to blow through that just saying what I'm saying right now.
Okay. Go. Go.
Okay. All right. So basically it boils down to this, like in the grand experiment that is Canada. Canada's a federation, right? It isn't like a strong federal government. It's strong provincial governments that are linked by a federation agreement, which is our, constitution. Okay.
Yep.
So in many ways, the government that matters most to everyday Canadians is their provincial government, not their federal government. Right. But some of the things that the federal government does do require them to gather tax revenue from the provinces, right? Yeah. Among those things that the federal government does is give tax assistance to the provinces. So they do this through something called equalization payments, where relatively wealthy provinces pay into a pool that is then paid out to relatively poorer provinces. And I'm saying relatively here because, Canada has an extremely high standard of living considering how low its per capita GDP is.
Indeed, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So like, as a country, we're rather poor. We're just doing okay anyway. And one of the reasons why that's true is because of this equalization scheme. Now, the issue from Alberta's perspective is that the federal government for the last 10 years or so, like the Trudeau, kind of era and now the Carney era, has been relatively speaking hostile to Alberta's oil and gas interests, right? But they're perfectly happy to spend Alberta's money giving equalization payments to other provinces. Mostly the Maritimes. So like that's part of the reason why Albertans in general and the current Alberta government in particular feel like separatism is maybe not, plan A, but it's at least on the menu.
Yeah.
Right.
What is the gist of this issue that you've posted about? And I think you called it, right? Like you posted on LinkedIn and then there was a big announcement. Like, what was that?
Well, so the first post I made on LinkedIn was about the memorandum of understanding, right? Basically, an agreement in principle about how Alberta and Ottawa were going to enable the construction of a major pipeline to the West Coast, right? Like, by the way, doing westward facing oil and gas, like midstream stuff, like trying to push oil and gas out to the West Coast is a major, it would be a huge economic win for Canada, because most of the markets that our oil is best suited for are in South and East Asia.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
That's where the spare refining capacity is. It's where the markets are, right? Because like our southern neighbor that buys most of our oil right now, the United States of America, refineries are at 90+% capacity. They are already making enough oil to fill those refineries themselves. They just top up from us, right? We're already sending a bunch of oil and gas all over the country using rail and trucking and things like that. So a pipeline is just the natural next step. It's a much more efficient way to move, especially crude oil, but oil and gas product generally, across long distances. There are massive socioeconomic and environmental concerns about pipeline construction.
Yeah.
Are they greater than the exact same concerns when applied to trucking or trains? That's a matter of opinion, analysis, and expertise that I frankly don't possess.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But the first post that kind of took off a little bit was the about the MOU itself, which was basically like, we need to do a handful of things. Like, we need to get a carbon pricing agreement that applies to Alberta. We need to nail that down. We need to get the Pathways project, the carbon capture project. We need to nail that down. We need to get hit some certain targets about when there will be a federal proponent, a private proponent. And all this stuff. Like, there were like target dates. And
this is all like,
specifics.
I mean, let's put aside the environmental, like my own perspective on environment and the environmental impacts that it could have, but like, it generally is a pretty positive kind of step forward in terms of like the economic well-being of Albertans and Canadians overall. No?
It could be, because it signals Ottawa's willingness to incorporate oil and gas into the national energy strategy, not just in fact, but also as a matter of law, and like putting its money where its mouth is, basically, or putting it more to the point, putting its mouth where its money is, because the Trudeau government built a pipeline. Just to be clear, like, it wasn't like, the last 10 years saw no oil and gas development, but it did see a lot of false starts, a lot of stop-start stuff. And like, the reason why the government had to get involved in building a pipeline in the first place is because of a lot of that, permitting, and consultation stop-start stuff that was mandated by the federal government. So you could really make an argument that they caused a problem, which they then had to solve. But the fact remains that the Trudeau government paid for a pipeline.
Yeah, right? Government causing problems, like who'd have thunk it?
Which they then have to solve. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's a tale as old as time.
Great
but
moving.
this kind of, at the very least. Thank you.
Let's not go off on a tangent there. But yeah, at the very least, you were saying.
At the very least, it signals that there is some willingness to change that dynamic right now.
Yeah.
So whether the projects involved are viable or not is actually what I want to talk about today.
So what is the potential, like, size of these projects? What are we talking about?
We're talking about billions.
Yep.
Right. Probably double-digit billions,
depending
on how many of these projects there are and how badly they go over. We could be in triple-digit billions.
Right.
Okay. Now, as I said, I don't have enough domain expertise in these specific areas to give you like really solid estimates. And both projects, the pipeline and the Pathways project, are so poorly defined at this point that it would be impossible for anybody to come up with anything better than like a plus or minus 100%, estimate on them. They're really, really early. But we are talking about billions of dollars of investment. And it's a combination of federal money and provincial money and private money.
Yeah.
And that last one, I think, is where the sticking point really is.
Yeah. So what is that sticking point?
Well, Alberta and Ottawa can agree on whatever they want to, but when it comes to the project, someone's actually got to go build them.
Right.
Like there is at the present time no private proponent for the pipeline. Right. The Pathways Alliance exists, right? So the carbon capture project, at least in principle, has a proponent, right? I think it's a paper tiger. I don't think that product's going to go anywhere. And, part of the reason why a lot of the press, like, by the way, this brings me to the second post, there was then, the MOU said you have to do carbon capture or carbon pricing by this date. That date came and went. But then, they did it, right? Like they arrived at an agreement in principle on what the carbon pricing scheme would be. And that was the most recent news about it. And that was like, shout it from the rooftops. Alberta and Ottawa agree on something. Isn't it amazing? Right. And that's great. It's a really important step.
I sense a but coming. Yeah, there you go. But yeah.
But there's still not a, Pathways is still a loser. Sorry, but it is. Like it's just not going to do what it says on paper. Ottawa explicitly tied the pipeline to Pathways, right?
Yep.
So, we're committed to Pathways, whether it's a good idea or not. And nobody has stepped up to say, we want to build this pipeline. It should be our pipeline, right?
Why do you think, the chief executive is of the companies that could build the pipeline? Why do you think, rather, what's going through their head right now in terms of, should I put my hand up to build this pipeline? I'm not going to right now.
I've got two answers to that question, and the first one rhymes with British Columbia. So, for those of you who don't know, BC, British Columbia, is the province immediately west of us, us being Alberta, and it is the land through which this pipeline would actually travel. Okay. Because once the pipeline exits Alberta, if it's going to get to the Pacific Ocean, unless it's going to go extremely far north through the territories and then cut back down, which it won't, it's going through BC, right? So the BC government, not okay with this plan.
Big problem. Yeah.
Big problem. Like, Alberta and Ottawa, like they clasped hands and they agreed, like, we're going to do pipeline. And Alberta was like, even if no private proponent shows up to the party, we'll build it as like a provincial project. And everyone's like, oh, wow, you're okay, all right. But like, they got to build it through a third guy's thing. you know?
So and BC is saying no way.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, if you and your neighbor 2 houses down agreed to string a clothesline between your yards, and the neighbor in between was like, hang on a second. I don't want that.
That's a good analogy. Like, I like that.
Or like a giant slide that goes from one yard to the other.
Man, I would love that.
That'd be cool. Yeah, that'd be real cool.
Yeah. So CEOs of the owner operators are not putting their hand up because there's just no viability right now.
At the moment, it's a non-starter, right?
Mm-hmm.
BC has already rejected numerous proposals to build pipelines through their territory. Any oil and gas expansion that impacts the central BC is pretty much not taken seriously right now, and that's a little unfair. Like, there is some stuff that happens in there, but like a big crude oil pipeline coming from the oil sands down to the Pacific coast, again, kind of like Vancouver area and thereabouts, it's just a non-starter right now.
What's the second issue?
Yeah. The second issue, I hesitate to call an issue because it's more like, did everybody say yes, right?
Right.
So we already said, like, BC said no. Who else is involved in everybody, Nate?
Is that rhetorical? You want me to answer that question?
Oh, no. I think you can answer
First Nations.
It's
the
totally
Indigenous.
First Nations.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the Indigenous community.
And I would say CEOs, executives, project sponsors, they know this and they try hard to engage. There is
sometimes not hard enough, but yes, it's definitely on their to-do list. Yeah,
it's definitely on their mind.
Yeah,
with regard
100%.
to these projects.
So insofar as BC isn't super excited about a pipeline that runs through BC, Indigenous groups tend not to be super excited about pipelines that run through Indigenous land either. Right? Now that's a broad sweeping generalization. It's not true, for certain communities that have been, very supportive of oil and gas development. But it is true in that there will be some that have already expressed concerns with a Alberta to the West Coast pipeline through BC that would run through their territory in whole or in part, right?
Right.
So that's issue number 2, and both of them point to the same, situation, which is that it's just that it's a bit of a nothing burger at the moment. As a project, there's no way to build it, right? Like we're not going to shoot the oil up into the sky and then just hope it comes down in the right spot and just collect it in a big funnel. It's like we can't just go over.
Visual picture right now is like, wow.
Yeah, the black rain.
So if that's non-starter, then like what is like the sort of the next step? Right?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing that makes this all so, because the MOU did a few things that I think were strategically very smart for Ottawa. One, it signaled support for a pipeline. Two, it didn't necessarily graduate the Pathways project to like a first tier MPO project, but it definitely made it a priority nationally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as my quibbles with the Pathways project notwithstanding, you and I have talked before about how like private or public investment towards the public good, even if the project looks like a failure on paper, may actually be hugely beneficial in the long term, like the extreme long term. So even if it just employs a few thousand people for 10 years, like that's not nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the fact that kind of got graduated into, quote unquote, real boy status, kind of is a good thing. The third thing it did was it put the onus for getting all of those agreements, like all those stakeholder agreements, on Alberta. Ottawa was basically like, you want a pipeline? Get everybody lined up and you can have a pipeline.
Like it seems like a bit of boundary setting, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like Ottawa's like, look, you go do it, make it happen. Go.
Yeah, it was basically the government document version of you do you, bro.
Well, I mean, in a sense like that, it kind of makes sense because like Alberta, wants to be independent. Let's say like there are some Albertans that want to be independent. I think, being able to go and negotiate those, relationships and those sort of pragmatic, sort of where the rubber meets the road deals is actually letting Alberta chart its own path. Now it is a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of work, right? And right now they're hitting some walls with regard to those partnerships, but
some totally obvious, extremely well anticipated walls, right?
Pray tell.
So that's it's just the same thing that happened the last time Alberta wanted to build a pipeline through BC. Like this isn't some kind of new thing. Like there are multiple that you could point to, but like the point is that this isn't our first bite at this particular apple, right? So on the one hand, you're right. If Alberta really does want to be the master of its own destiny, it ought to be able to do things like this unilaterally, and now that it has the blessing of the federal government to do so, it's like put up or shut up, right?
Yeah.
And like Danielle Smith basically said the same thing in her statement after that, which was like, this should signal to people in Alberta who want to be relatively independent of the federal government that this is our opportunity to do exactly that, right? And she was speaking, and that was an extreme paraphrase, but like she was speaking within the bounds of Alberta, remaining within Canada and just having some additional autonomy that the other provinces do not enjoy because the other provinces are not quite as married to one private industry as Alberta is, right?
Albert, what's your one piece of advice for Alberta when it gets a real proponent to actually build this? Like once they get, all the agreements, all the partners, Indigenous and provincial in line?
Well, I would actually take a step back. I don't think it's safe to assume that we'll get to that point of having everybody on the same page. The way things currently stand, there's no scope, right? And this was the topic of my follow-up post was like, what's the scope of this pipeline? Like, how much is it going to move? Where? We don't know. Like, there's no actual proposal. And my piece of advice would be I'm borrowing this from a keynote that I heard at the CNA a few years ago, where the leader of an Indigenous group, name escapes me at the moment, feel a little ashamed of that, but it was a really solid keynote because I remember thinking at the time, like, what could this person possibly have to add to a nuclear conference? Well, here's what she had to add. Okay. She basically said, proponents for building new infrastructure feel like they have a great idea that must be executed in exactly the form, that they have imagined it. And then they take it to Indigenous communities and they are confused why those communities Don't just sign off, right? Like, don't just say, oh, yeah, this is perfect, right? What they should be doing instead is taking the general idea to the communities and saying, how can we make this work for you, right? What is the right way for this to take shape and for you to feel like you're a meaningful participant and that you have some ownership over the process and that the scope makes sense for you and your community? Like, invert that from here's what we're going to do, say yes or no, to why don't you tell us what we should be doing, right? To accomplish this very same goal. Because like our goal of meeting Alberta's goal of moving crude oil to the West Coast so that it can be transported to customers in South and East Asia is, in my opinion, a very good goal, right? Like whether we want to decarbonize or not, the customers are out there. We're leaving money on the table by not selling that oil to people who want it, right? And I'm all about decarbonization, but you can do both, right? We can use the receipts from that to pay for green energy. And that's one of the things that's on the table with this MOU, right? That's the reason why it's all married to pathways. Even if that's misguided, it's moving in the right direction, right? It came with a carbon, you know what I mean? Like it's all pushing in the same direction of like sell the oil, right, to the customers who want it and use the money to do something good in Canada, right? So shouldn't that start with the most key stakeholders helping to describe what that scope could be if it were to be a success, right?
Right.
And like, if I were a private proponent, I might try something like that. I might, because you said it earlier, and you're right. Like the CEOs and boards of directors for major oil companies, midstream, upstream, downstream, doesn't matter. They all have experience working with Indigenous communities to obtain their approval, but more so just to get engaged with them and understand best how they're, you know what I mean? Like they know how to do this, right? Like they know how to go have these conversations, at least in principle they do. So I would suggest that anybody who might be interested in building this pipeline, even if it feels a bit like a pipe dream,
Ching.
yeah, thank you. But even if it feels a little bit far out at the moment, right? At least having some idea of what the acceptable scope would be for some of these more, reticent stakeholders. That seems like a really good first step.
Indeed.
So I would say, my concerns about there not being a scope attached to this are resolved by figuring out what the scope should be. And maybe that should be dictated, at least in part, by the government of British Columbia, the needs of the people who live there, including and especially Indigenous and First Nations communities along the way.
Yeah.
Let's figure out what they want.
Thanks, Albert.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Nate.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Hey, everybody. It's Albert here. Thanks for tuning in to the Risky Planner podcast. We hope today's conversation was informative and, above all else, inspires you to excellence in what you do. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps us reach more listeners just like you. I'd also like to thank Thompson Igbo for letting us use his excellent music on our show. If you like what you hear, check him out at igbomusic.com. That's EGBO music.com. Talk at you later.